Teachers of Reddit, what's the most interesting thing a child has brought in for show and tell? Not a teacher, but we had a kid bring a military grade smoke bomb of some sort into my high school once for some class project. He thought it was a dud. All I remember is a whole crap ton of red smoke and then everyone going home early. At least you aren't the guy who thought it would be funny to set off a tear gas grenade in the locker room. One of my professors told me that when he was in first grade, a kid in his class got his toe cut off in a lawnmower accident. The kid brought in his toe in a jar for show and tell. Like, suspended in some fluid or... I had one little guy bring in rocks and fossils to my class. Teacher here. Now, I love that stuff, too, so I'd bring in pieces from my collection as well. It started with bits of obsidian, amethyst chunks, local mollusks in shell, and it went back and forth for several weeks. We even traded a few pieces. I'm friends with his parents, and they were cool with it. Then I brought in a big, complete fish fossil from a local river, complete with sparkling scales. He thought that was cool. Then he brought in a complete fossilized beehive. I was gobsmacked. I didn't even know this was possible. His parents and I contacted the local museum, and that fossil is now on public display. It is the finest of its kind found in British Columbia, and the kid dug it up on his grandparents' farm. I can tell an interesting story. My youngest sister is adopted from China. We have a cousin, white like the rest of us. That's a model and at this point was in a lot of magazines like Cosmo, Vogue, etc. My sister brought in magazines to show off for show and tell. All the crappy little third grade girls made fun of her, saying that the girl in the magazines wasn't her cousin because of the white Chinese thing. The next time it was my sister's turn, she brought in our cousin in the flesh with a bigger stack of magazines. Checkmate. B. When I was younger, my sister got my grandparents to bring a miniature horse to the school for show and tell. Mind you, they had to drive 3.5 hours to do it, and the horse rode in the backseat all the way there and all the way home. I think she won the award for coolest show and tell that day. A kid in a couple years lower than me had a dad that was a banker. He brought in some cool play money and even handed some out to kids, including me. When I showed my play money note to my parents, they were shocked to find it was actually $2 100 bills. I'm from the UK. A letter from the school went out to all the parents asking them to bring it back to school. Imagine that kid was in a crap load of trouble. A bit difficult, but we had a pet day at school and most people just brought their cats and dogs. At lunch we did a big show where people with pets walked around in a large circle. I remember hysterically laughing cause this one girl brought her pet fish and was trying to walk with it. We were probably about 6 or 7 at the time, so she was really struggling with the thing and trying to walk without sloshing the water. Props to her though, she loved her fish. We had this day too. I went to a rural school in Arkansas, kind of close to the Texas border. As a kindergartner, I once brought a homing pigeon to show and tell. The class tied a note to its leg and we released the bird. The next day for show and tell, I brought the note. That's awesome. A child's trekking stick made out of a human femur. Legit. Despite the legality of using human remains being in question, and some serious side-eye from me all year during conferences, the story of how he acquired it was quite interesting. Apparently, it was a family heirloom and the kid's great-great-grandson dug it up from his backyard in rural Virginia back in the early 1800s and named it, no joke, Lemuel. Despite the legality of using human remains being in question, as far as I know it's perfectly legal to own and transport human remains in the United States. My son was assigned to bring his favorite book one day. Well, he was absolutely fascinated with the phone book that recently came. Took it to school. Later learned every teacher heard about internet generation kid who loves the phone book. AWW, this is actually so sweet. TBH, the phone book is pretty cool for someone who grew up with the internet as a primary means of communication. It's a look into how things were in the past. Not a teacher, but my cousin brought me in for her show and tell item once. She was 5 and I was 1, so I don't remember it, but apparently her classmates really liked me. I brought my granny once in grade 1 or 2. She was Scottish with a thick accent and I proudly promised the class that I would translate for them if they couldn't understand what she was saying. She talked about that until the day she died. Not a teacher, but I remember a student brought in a sword, which he claimed his grandfather took off of a Japanese airplane that he shot down during the war. I don't think his parents knew he took it. I still can't get around how a little kid was able to sneak what sounds like a katana to kindergarten. When I was in kindergarten we did show and tell by the letters of the alphabet. IDK how others did it. So when we get to W I brought my dad. His name is Wes. I grew up around horses, so when we were on H my dad brought a horse for us to pet. The town I lived in was really small, so it wasn't the weirdest thing. My sister's class did show and tell the same way. She got L, so she tried to bring in our aunt. Couldn't figure out why because her name starts with V and she's an artist in NY. Nothing L related. Of course everyone tells her this. Then sister gets all mad and is like, but lesbian starts with L. She ended up taking an LP. I'm not a teacher, but when I was in elementary school I brought in my pet squirrel. My dad had a schedule in which he was off work that day, so he brought her to the school for me in her harness and leash. I had a kid in grade 1 bring in his sock. He said it was smelly and used it for training to cope with bad smells. 17 5-year-olds rolled on the floor in hysterics. Best show and tell ever. He sounds destined for greatness. Great smells. Taught at a rural Canadian school last year. Kid in grade 6 brought in pictures of a hunt he went on with his old man. One picture was of this little 4-foot boy holding a severed deer head. Check this crap out was what he said to his friends as soon as he arrived that morning. In elementary school, 1991-ish, I brought in a jar of mercury my grandfather got from working in a steel mill. The school didn't like that. My parents got it back. Oh, wow. In middle school, a kid brought a lot of mercury in and broke the jar it was in. Hazmat got called. School got evacuated. It was a fun day. My old secondary school tutor told us that when she did her training they had a show and tell day and a kid brought in a shark tooth necklace and said they were from real sharks his uncle had killed while away. He passed the necklace around and while talking one of the other kids went, if these are from a real shark why do they say made in China on the back? The other kid, without missing a beat, went they were Chinese sharks. Duh. I wasn't the teacher in this case, but a guy brought in a slave collar from before the Civil War. This was a history class, and we were discussing the early 1800s. We had all learned about slavery, of course, but seeing a thick iron collar and chain that were meant to be placed around the neck of a human being so they could be sold as property. To this day, it's the only thing I've ever seen that just felt evil. Someone brought air in a bag from his room. He opened it and tried to get everyone to smell it. He told everyone afterwards it was just a fart and everyone just lost it. Had a student who wanted to bring in a dummy hand grenade. He was somewhere on the spectrum and was super into military history and he could not understand why he couldn't bring it into school. It had no explosives but was 100% accurate in every other way. To be fair, I had trouble understanding why he couldn't bring it in. My best friend in the 3rd grade went up and presented the teacher. He said, "This is our teacher, he's very old and likes to eat carrots." He promptly sat down with a look of triumph. I took a sword in once, wrapped up nicely and secretly. My parents had no idea and my teacher was very shocked when I swung that out. I can still remember the look on her face. I was in grade 12 bio when we had a 2-bodied pig born in the barn. 1 nose, 2 eyes, 4 ears and everything further back doubled. I brought it into class and caused quite the stir. According to my 8-year younger brother, the teacher still talks about how awesome it was to see. One of my kindergarten students brought in a legit set of Russian matryoshka dolls. Every time she opened one and there was another inside, everyone in the room lost their crap. Every time. Goddamn, most hilarious show and tell I can remember, lol. Not a teacher, but my mom is and has wonderful stories. One of my favorites is this kid that forgot to bring something to show and tell. Instead of panicking, he just pretended to hold something about a foot big in his hands and presented his invisible car. I'm talking describing the structure of the car, where he got it. It was some basic store like Walmart or something. I can't remember, and how he liked to play with it. He even took extra care to carry it back and put it carefully on his desk, moving it a bit to the side so he could access his coloring sheet. Just to have fun, my mom asked him about it a few days later and he goes, "Oh that? Yeah, I got bored with it so I gave it away." What a neat way to wrap up his story. Kids are crazy creative. He missed an opportunity saying that he couldn't find it emo. I'm not a school teacher, but a leader for a program in a church. Stuffed animal night. Some little boy brought in a devil plush toy that said "I love you" in a creepy voice. I worked with the 3-5-year-olds. Out of the 16 there that night, 15 left crying and 1 left laughing. Stan is okay with this. When I was in elementary school, my great-grandmother brought in her husband's military medals from his time in service during World War II. She sat with the class and explained all about his service and what each medal ribbon represented. Close to 30 years later and I still remember her sitting up front talking to us. Not a teacher but a student. To preface this, my family tends to have macabre humor, even when I was young. For show and tell, one day I brought in a story. The night before, my mom and dad were in the garage building shelves with big rubber mallets. I walked into the room and asked what's all that banging, to which my dad, 10 feet away from my mom, started shaking the mallet at her and said, "Oh, I'm beating your mother." Suddenly the head of the mallet flew across the room and hit her square in the face, breaking her nose. But that's not what my class heard. They heard the story of how my dad was beating my mother with a rubber mallet and broke her nose. This resulted in some fun trips to the school counselor and a visit from CPS. Why did I tell the story to my class? In all the commotion I never got a toy for show and tell, and that's all I had on hand. It was a fun time on all sides. Their mother's science set, which apparently is what a child at only 7 years of life will call a pipe and other drug paraphernalia. It took social services all but 2 hours to have the child removed. Now, a few months down the line, I'm learning they have already been housed with a few foster families, but it never works out. A truly lovely but troubled child. Not a teacher, but my favorite memory of show and tell. When I was in kindergarten, the first time we had show and tell, I bought in my favorite stuffed animal. Think on of the late 80s cartoons. It was one of those. Sitting in the classroom circle, I remember looking across and seeing the exact same toy being held by another little girl. We were so excited about it. She became my best friend and still is today, all because of a crazy stuffed animal. My dad found these opium bottles from the Canadian Pacific Railroad and he took it home telling me it was over 100 years old. My 9-year-old brain took it to school and we got a call. I was the student. In grade 1 or 2 I brought a skinned rabbit face in for show and tell. My aunt from Newfoundland sent it to me in the mail cause I guess they eat rabbits. I think this was close to Easter, which was most likely the reason she sent it then. Didn't realize how creepy that would have been for my teacher. My little brother took a cleaned rabbit skinned at his show and tell, because he and his friends used to go rabbit hunting with their bows and arrows. Obligatory not a teacher. I brought in my great uncle when I was in kindergarten. He fought in World War II and was an anti-aircraft gunner. He had a shell explode near him and had huge shrapnel scars on his legs that he showed off. I explained about bombs and debris and he told stories about his time with the Canadian Army and lying about his age to go fight. My teacher thought it was pretty morose and that we were a bit young to discuss war, but I think he did a good job of explaining things on a level 5-year-olds could understand. I honestly think it's so cute when kids are like, "I am bringing you for show and tell like me. I'm honored. Thank you." Not a teacher, but my little brother once made a rocket out of tampons glued to a stick and took it to school. The teacher called my mom and told her all about the rocket. He was in 1st grade, so the rocket was not a school threat, but it was just funny. Also, he once took a bag of grass to school and the school called and asked what his intentions were. He told the teacher that he likes dealing with the weeds with dad. In all reality, he liked helping dad garden and liked mowing the yard with his toy mower next to dad. Please tell me you or your parents have a picture of that rocket. Not a teacher, but in 3rd grade I had a bunch of baby chicks hatched. I think I originally brought in a toy, but then my grandpa came by to drop off my lunch. I had forgotten right when it was my turn to show and tell. My grandpa had brought in a runt baby chick he was keeping warm in his coat pocket, and instead of the toy I decided the little chick would be my show and tell for the week. My teacher loved it. The kids loved it. My grandpa loved it. It was great. Not a teacher but a kid at a school local to me bought a deactivated stun grenade. Teachers brought the army in. Kids were evacuated. My son feels his rock collection is no longer interesting enough. To be fair, every rock is a stun grenade if your aim is good. I brought in pictures of my family vacation to the World Trade Center for a kindergarten show and tell that was on the 9th of October 2001. Dang, I wish adults could have show and tell at work. You could do a little presentation and tell jokes or stories or show off a cool hobby and it would bring you closer to co-workers tbh. Not a teacher, but in high school one of my friends brought his newborn sister's placenta. Our biology teacher got all up in it and was handling it and seemed super stoked that my friend brought it to show. She gave him some gnarly extra credit if I recall. There's this website that makes teddy bears out of your baby's placenta. When I was pregnant with my first daughter, I emailed my dad the link and told him that would be his Christmas present that year. Obligatory, not a teacher, but in kindergarten, we had a project that we each had a predetermined day where we had to bring in our most special favorite things. One kid brought in his NES, a couple brought in toys or dolls. On my day, I brought in my dad. We were super poor at the time, and I know he didn't get paid for taking the day off, so I know my parents had to sacrifice to make it happen. I will remember getting to spend the whole school day with my best friend forever. The moment you told your dad you wanted to bring him in as your most special favorite thing was definitely way more valuable to him than a day's worth of pay. My aunt from Washington sent me a she got from her roof and photos from when Mt. St. Helens erupted for a science project. I got extra credit for that, and anytime show and tell came around through the school years. Not a teacher, but I brought in both of my cats. Our school allowed kids to bring their pets in for show and tell, but most people brought in things like hamsters and mice and other small animals. I brought 2 fully grown cats. My brother brought his horse to take your pet to school day. He was the perfect horse for it since he didn't care if kids hung all over him or weren't too careful about the strength of their pets. He was a great old horse. Not a teacher, but I heard a story of a kid who, during winter, found a bee's nest which appeared to have been vacated of all bees. He brought it to school and as it sat there it warmed up that suddenly some bees came flying out. ETA this very loosely if at all fits your question, but I hope it's allowed anyway. This isn't for show and tell, but I've had kids come in with a few weird things. I teach preschool. The parents bring them in with their weird toy and laugh, telling me it's what got us out of the house. Memorable ones are a spray paint can lid, 1 year old, found in the garage on the way to the car. Dad had dropped off and mom gave me the most WTF look when she picked up that night and I handed it back to her. A hair tire, a Hot Wheels and a handheld bubble machine that was broken. 3-yo, a little bubble wand necklace. 3-yo, with no bubbles in it. A bag of marbles. I think he was 3. A 24 pack of cheap dollar store crayons. 2 years old, $1 and some random change. 2 years old wanted lunch money in a baggie like his big brother. The best one though was a 2-year-old who found a rock at the beach over the weekend and he would not let it go, mom said. His nickname was Pickle, and so I come into work to find a plain grey rock sitting on my counter with Pickle written in pretty letters by mom. Not a teacher, but I once took a mammoth's tooth in for show and tell once. It got passed around, and everyone seemed to be really interested in it. I had to leave it with a teacher during the day because I was afraid it would get damaged. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.